The root is your base chakra. It's where everything begins. To climb the ladder to your higher self, the base needs to be on stable ground. We root down to rise up. Our root chakra is how we ground, how we connect, how we're connected to our ancestors, our history. All of that is what makes us who we are. When we're feeling unstable, unsettled, often it's because of either a block in our root chakra or the fact that we're not feeling grounded. Ways to connect and ground down further through your root is connecting with nature, gardening, stomping your feet on the ground, drumming, walking barefoot outside, standing yoga poses, dressing in browns, earth tones, reds, even the exciting part of getting a pedicure, anything that connects our feet to the earth, anything that helps us connect ourselves to nature and where we came from. Spending time with your family, if that's good for you, talking about your history, researching your ancestors. All of those are ways and techniques to connect into your root. How much do you know about the chakras? You probably heard them talked about as the 7 main energy centers in your body. You may have heard of them in yoga class, through guided meditation, or in Reiki. Maybe you know a little bit about the chakras, but aren't really sure how to use them to guide you. I'm creating a deep dive into the chakras and color therapy for the next 8 weeks. Each week, my guest and I will discuss one chakra, how they've connected to the energy of that chakra through their journey, and how they feel guided or inspired by the energy. Sound interesting? I hope you'll enjoy the conversation. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Grounding Journey, where we're going to talk all about the root chakra. And that is the base where it all starts. So it's a great conversation to really start digging in. And today I'm joined by my guest, Amanda. She is a holistic healer and New Earth visionary. She is here to assist with the anchoring in the new earth and unity consciousness. She feels the veil is thin and the old way simply does not work any longer. Amanda has a passion for supporting people and meeting them where they are in their journey. And that makes you a perfect conversation to talk about the root chakra. So welcome, Amanda. I'm so glad you're here.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me, Cris. I'm so grateful, honored, happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, well, thank you. And, our first question is always the same. So we know a little bit about the formal version of you. Tell us who you are. What do your friends know as Amanda?
So I definitely am very bubbly and goofy, and my favorite dance move is the sprinkler. So I love to just have fun. I love to just have a good time with life and just have that balance of, going deep and really being able to be vulnerable, but also laugh my way through life. I think it's sometimes we can get so caught up in doing the work and all these things. And it's no, let's have a good time too. So I would say my friends would probably say I'm a balance of the two. I'm very, I'm all about what we're doing here on this planet and what I've come to understand in this moment, which constantly shifts, is kind of something I'm here to help bring in. And then also being able to have some fun along the way and revel in the little things, even if it's just a food dish and I'm so excited about it. So I love to just bring excitement to those seemingly little things that are actually can be the big things, because it can just shift everything in an instant. So
I love that. And I can definitely see that about your personality, that you're very bubbly and cheerful. And when we did our intro call, I just felt so happy after talking to you, and we only talked for a couple minutes. So I think it's a great to have this root conversation with somebody who's bubbly and uplifting, because the root is our ancestor healing, our safety, where it all starts. And I know for some people, they start their journey through the chakras at the crown. For me, I'm just a root girl. That's where I've already started it. And so I think it's fun to have this conversation with you, because you do work with healing for ancestral patterns, conditioning, imprints, and beliefs. But when I asked you what chakra you feel the biggest connection to, you said heart. And when asked, why do you feel most connected right now, you also said sacral. So it'll be a neat conversation. And I think it will also be something where we can talk about the fact that it's not just root. they all blend and intermingle and intertwine together.
Yeah. And I think it's even like time of day, right? Because when I wrote that, it's like, okay, I was like, yeah, no, that actually makes sense why I would say that. And one thing I'm even learning about the root chakra that's so beautiful, it's like sometimes we get so into like doing all this spiritual work and ascending. But at the end of the day, we have a physical body. We're wearing this meat suit, if you will. And so I'm just really learning the beauty and the availability of us to really ground into our physical body. And I feel like this is so tied to the root chakra, because I feel that when we have these bouts of trauma or we feel unsafe, parts of us like don't want to fully be in the body. So we leave the body, so to speak, in certain situations. And parts of us, can be kind of left elsewhere, or, they're just not fully connected to the root chakra. And also kind of adding on our connection to the planet and to earth that we live on is also like grounded into the root chakra and the earth star chakra, which is even below our feet. So it's this beautiful, again, I'm all about balance. It's this beautiful balance of, when we are doing this, spiritual higher dimensional work and we're connecting to source and our higher self, and then also connecting to the earth and being able to experience like all of what we are.
I think that's such a great point that you brought in. And to kind of take my take on that, one of the books that you and I discussing for the bonus episode that we're not going to talk about is The Untethered Soul. And so to bring something in from that, because I just finished reading that this weekend, and I think you mentioned how we are so focused on enlightenment and ascending and moving up through the crown chakras. And so many books and conversation at this point talk about, well, we're not our physical self. We're not our identity. We're the spirit being, we're the light being. And that's one of the things he talks about in Untethered Soul. And I think we get so caught up in that we forget that our mission on earth this time around and this body is to be here, to be present, to not just be ascending to awakening. There is an element, because if that's all we were supposed to be, we would just be light bodies. We wouldn't be humans. And so I think that's a great point that you bring up. And in starting the conversation about root, giving other people the permission to not feel awakened and ascended in this conversation, to feel, one of the things he talks about is, well, who are you? And the answer was, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a this, I'm a that. No, you aren't, because in 20 years, that's not who you were. 20 years ago, that's not what you were. But I take great pride in being a wife, a mother myself, and a light being. So having that conversation about, it's okay that you feel just grounded and in your body, and sometimes not like you're moving up or becoming awakened.
Yeah, right. Because it's kind of a combination of all of these things. And when we're disconnected from a part of us in that sense, then it's going to cause discord in other areas. Like if we don't have a properly functioning root chakra, then because to me, like the root chakra is a lot around like this aspects of safety and presence and stability, and even like provision on like a physical reality. So do you mind if I kind of share a little story about my like
Please.
Okay, perfect. So when I was growing up, my parents got a divorce. I was about six years old, and I disconnected from my physical body in many ways, shape, and form. And I just didn't feel safe at all. Like I didn't feel safe to be who I was. Yeah. And it was even to the point where I've, as I've been kind of peeling back the layers, it became, had this awareness to like, my light is too bright and it's not safe to be here. And it's not safe for me to fully be me. And so there were all kinds of issues, from my nervous system to my breathing. I wasn't breathing properly. I was just all outside of myself. And it was because at the time it was too painful for me to actually be present and to feel the emotions and to be able to, like, because children cannot digest these like traumatic situations. In a lot of situations that come up, in the younger years, it's very hard for children to digest these very charged experiences. And so, it's just, you know, some ways where we disconnect. And then if it foundationally, if we don't feel safe to be here and our nervous system isn't functioning properly, we're going to be in like that fight, flight, or even freeze mode. And so we're going to continue to kind of experience life in this way. And a lot of times I hear people talk about the nervous system, and there, you know, there are a lot of ways to really get the circuitry and really get those, you know, kind of those divine templates, I like to call them, back online properly. And one of the most simple ways is just even connecting to God, source, universe, whatever you want to call it, and really just allowing the energy and frequency of love to come through, because it's just so much bigger than us.
Yes.
And it's a way that we can really start to unravel and unwind and reset this system so we actually feel safe to be human and to be here, because that's foundational.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing when it started and where it started for you, because so many of us, most of us, have something in our childhood that threatened our safety. My parents were still married, but my dad was diagnosed with cancer when I was in 8th grade. And in 9th grade, we didn't think he was going to live. So mine was a little bit later, but feeling that my dad was going to die, that rocked all levels of safety for me, and watching how sick he was. So we all have some level in our childhood of that safety being shaken. I think part of it is because then we have to consciously choose to create our own safety, because that's part of us, and our responsibility and our experience is to consciously choose that. So share with me a little bit what your journey has looked like as an adult to build that safety, to explore the unsafe feelings and release them for you, so that you really worked through that.
It's been a combination of messy and beautiful, and I wouldn't change, I
Yes.
wouldn't change anything of it. But I think that's another like kind of misconception in the spiritual community that I like to point out is it's not always just love and light, because when we have these, and I also want to mention too, like this can, because we mentioned ancestry, and even in the womb, this can start in the womb. If you don't even feel safe in the womb, like it's already like, that's the foundation that's already starting at that very, you know, it's like, you don't know what you don't consciously know. And then it's the unconscious kind of running the show. So just, yeah, it has been a very humbling journey, because kind of going back to what I mentioned about the like love and light culture, if you will, it's like we can, and I think it's very powerful. We are conscious creators. We're like little human transmitters, magnets, whatever you want to kind of call it. But at the same time, if we have these different identities, the patterns, the programming, the imprints, and all the things running in the background, it creates this kind of inner battle. Because if we don't want to see those aspects, it's like goes back to polarity. We got light and dark, you know, we got the feminine and the masculine, like there's just polarity in things. And if we're so far on the one side where it's like, you know, I don't want to choose to see these things, and I'm just going to almost be like love and light only, toxic positivity, sometimes it would be referred to, then we're kind of sidestepping the opportunity to release the density that is in that we've held inside our body. And it can really be so simple as just bringing that presence to the here and now for what's showing up. And I've noticed, because I've gone through my own process it's been probably about 7-8 years since I kind of had my initial awakening. And I've noticed in my own process, it's like sometimes it's not even necessarily feeling the emotion and going through the healing that's the most challenging part. It's releasing like that resistance to the ego and the unconscious blocking of us being able to go there. Because when we go there, a part of us like dissolves. And I even kind of speak of it as a death. And so sometimes it feels like death, because the identity or the old belief or the old structure or the old way of staying safe or doing the thing, it's being like, it's dying, so to speak. It's not coming with. And so for me, it's been a very interesting experience to kind of navigate. And I've learned to just come to more of this place of flow and surrender with it. It's like, okay, what's showing up in this moment? And then bringing that awareness back to the physical body. Because the thing is, when we do that, we allow the space to, one, dissolve the attachment to whatever that thing is and bring that conscious perspective. And even if we don't know exactly what it is, deep down we do, but it allows us to neutralize that charge so we don't have to keep recreating it and taking it with us.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really powerful of, the last thing you said is we get to release it and we don't have to keep bringing it with us. And that's something from our childhood, our inner child. And then there's a whole lot from our ancestral stuff that we are also working through. I always make the joke that I'm doing as much ancestral work as I can so that Kevin, my son, doesn't have to, because he's got a whole slew of it on his dad's side. So I'm trying to add as little as possible on my side. And I think those goes hand in hand of the safety for our inner child. And as you mentioned, the womb and the things that we bring in, that we agreed to bring in and to work on in this life. So share a little bit with us about how you kind of work through ancestral healing, what you've experienced in that. Because that for me, even though I've had that issue of my safety, it was interesting listening to you. I'm like, you know what? I don't know that I've worked through that. I don't know that I've worked through my dad's illness to create my safety, because his illness created so much more for me of being present and not being at work all the time. And it taught me a different lesson. But then when I look for me at the root, it really resonates about ancestral patterns. So that's the neat thing about chakras, is there's multifacets to it. So for people who are listening who say, oh, safety's not really my thing, let's dig into ancestral stuff and how that works with the root also.
Yeah, I love that. And the first thing I would point out is one thing that I found very helpful is asking myself when something does come up, is this mine? Did I create this?
Mm-hmm.
Because it just helps me with if there is something there for me to see, it just kind of peels back a whole layer and I can see it through a different lens. Because I also want to say that I don't feel, because I hear some people say, oh, well, it's my job to clear all of this stuff. I truly believe by us healing and going within on ourselves and and really acknowledging these things that we're carrying offers that to the ancestors and it offers it to the
Mm-hmm.
children, like you mentioned. But sometimes I hear people like, oh, well, I got to do all this digging and I got it's like they are like carrying this burden.
Mm-hmm.
And if you choose to do that, no judgment at all, but I just don't feel that it's necessary. And sometimes I don't feel like these things are actually like we think they're helpful, but if we are lowering our vibration and our frequency to go in and to do someone else's work, like maybe there's a lesson for them. Maybe there's some sort of responsibility or thing they wanted to learn. And so not only are we like lowering our vibration, but we're also taking the opportunity from someone else by taking responsibility for something that maybe wasn't necessarily ours to take responsibility for. So I just kind of wanted to mention that.
Well, let's talk about that for a second before we get into ancestor, because that's a great point of the whole process. Like for me right now, the two words I have written on my computer are harmony and reverence. Because for me, the whole thing about the work, and as I said, I make the joke about doing that for my son because his biological dad, that's a whole nother story.
And I love that. I truly believe that is like by you doing the work, it offers like that to like all the work we're doing right now. And for future baby, it affects it. It helps because we're raising the frequency of the collective consciousness as well.
Well, and I think it's having the reverence and the gratitude for the fact that it is our choice to do the work. Mm-hmm. It is our honor to get to do the work. And, in past episodes, I've talked, because all of my ancestral stuff comes from my grandmother. She passed a year and a half ago at 98. And she lingered for a really long time. And when I was talking to one of my good friends, she said, it's because her soul doesn't know where to go. It has no next step. And so through letting her go and healing of that, I saw all the generations of mine in the past really. And as you said, like I'm choosing to see it. I'm choosing to do the work because I have reverence for it and I have an honor for it and an extreme gratitude that I was chosen to do the work out of all the generations. But I almost hear them crying out for me to do it, to heal it, to give them that peace and to make sure that it doesn't continue on, because there's other stuff that's going to continue on. And so that I'm grateful that you brought up the fact that we don't have to do the work, that it's our choice to do the work. And when we lower our vibration by saying, oh, I've got to do this, it defeats the purpose of doing it. So holding that work for our own selves, for our ancestors, for our future generations, and reverence, that's the beauty. And to go back to something else you said, that doing the healing isn't all love and light. Like, let's be real. Most of the time, the actual work, there is no love and light. It's
No.
down and dirty. It's like digging in the dirt, gardening. Your fingernails get dirty, your toes get dirty. But while you're feeling that cool dirt under your fingers, you're like, oh my gosh, this feels so good. So I think that reverence is what brings the love and light to doing the work.
I love both of those words. I can feel that, like my whole body feels it. So I appreciate you saying that because it is so true. And I always mention it's like, there are days where I'm like, what did I sign up for? There was like a meme I saw and it was like, I don't know if you've seen Step Brothers, but like, it was like their third eyes were lit up and they're like light workers coming to Earth to like, to like mess up the matrix. I don't remember exactly what it said, but I was just like, it made me chuckle because we got to bring, humor to these things sometimes. But yeah, it's it's just one of those things where it's like, would I want to have to experience it all again, all the layers and all the emotional pain and all the tears I've cried out? Not really, but like for where I'm at right now and being able to like feel this sense of peace and freedom and being able to like be in my authenticity and because the thing is the way I explain it is like as we do this work it's like we're just releasing the lies, the distortions, all the things that actually aren't us, the characters that we play, because we play characters all the time. But if the character is not in alignment with our authentic essence, our soul's essence, that is part of what will cause discord in all of the bodies, the physical body, the emotional body. I could go on and on because if it's not in alignment, then it's like it's kind of like this, like, well, it's not fully truth. And then we have these things that come up as a result of, whether it be like the emotion, something feels a little off and we just don't really know why. These things can be kind of subtle, but I to circle back, like, it's like, I wouldn't have it any other way. Now,
Right.
maybe you could relate.
Yeah. I don't want to do it again, but if I had
Yeah.
the choice of not doing it and not being here or doing it and being here, I would do it to be
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
I get you.
Yes. And so, so kind of with like the ancestral stuff, it is, I do, cause it's like, almost like I see, like the vision I'm getting is like throwing like a pebble and it sends out a ripple effect, like by us. And sometimes when I'm doing this work, I'll just anchor in the intention. Like I'm just, acknowledging my ancestors, like my future children, like any of their higher selves that would love to accept this work that I'm doing, rather than it coming from a place of force, allowing like the divine and God, whatever word again that you resonates with people, to move through me rather than me doing it from this mental human construct. Because I've noticed, like, I've done both. I've had experiences where I've done the work more from like, kind of this mental kind of angle, if you will. And it feels so different and more constricted versus when it's like this, I'm in this place of surrender and this energy is working through me, because we all are a unique expression of God. And it's like a different energy rather than trying to control it and trying to force it.
Well, and that's part of the flow of energy, because with any of our chakras, when we stop something, when we hold hurt in us, it stops our energy flow. If you're holding hurt in your heart, then everything comes to your heart, up or down, and stops. But being open, it allows that full energy flow. So doing the work, because we're forcing it, stops the energy flow instead of allowing it to actually move through us. And most of the things that I feel I'm working on were either they are old stuff or the current stuff is being caused by old stuff. So really breathing into that, feeling that, so that it can move through you and move out of you, I think it's really important. It's easier said than done.
Yeah. And I love that you pointed out the breath, because I feel I've come to just really understand how powerful our breath is in helping with these sorts of things. So I had a lot of stuck energy in my hips and in my like hamstring area in my personal root chakra. And a lot of it was tied to these like identities and characters that I played and not feeling safe. And like this fear of judgment of like even showing up as who I am, and just not really kind of understanding my place in the world. Like, it's like I did, but I didn't. And so I've even as I've moved through some of these things, I found it to be a very powerful practice to actually talk to those specific body parts. Like, okay, right hip, like I'm feeling this, like, what do you have something to say? Because our body parts, like if all of us are consciousness, then it carries this consciousness. And if there's stuck energy there, then sometimes it's like very helpful to kind of be able to hold space for these different things, and then we can move through it. So it's like, I had a lot of it was just a kind of, it was like a combination of like lots of guilt and shame, and just sometimes we don't even need to know. It's just like,
Right.
is there anything that you want to share? Is there anything you want to say? And even just sending breath and just like placing a hand on it, like, I love you, I'm sorry, like, body, whenever you're ready, like you can release this. I support you. If you aren't ready, I support you. It's like developing this relationship with our physical body so that we're connected to our body rather than disconnected from our body. And again, if we're speaking of this groundedness in the earth and just even being here, like having that presence and that consciousness to just simply pause and check in with your body, and to ground into your body, and to like feel into those like stuck places. Because in the physical body, like if you have pain, it's trying to get your attention. There's no like, there's no, crazy reasons why. It's all tied together.
Well, and there are books and books and books and books written about that. And I like that you talked about your hips and feeling that discomfort, because that's one of the reasons I always resort to yoga. Because, and I've talked about it in other episodes, where yoga is like therapy for the body, because you don't suddenly go deep into pigeon pose and open your hip flexors. It takes time, just like therapy takes time to release it. It may be less emotionally painless to do the work through yoga versus it may be more physical when you're doing the work in yoga, but feeling into our bodies and seeing where the tightness is and releasing it, because a lot of those are energy blocks.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's even, I've learned to just like, to welcome the emotions. Like if emotion comes up, rather than trying to, because I hear often like, it's like, oh, we'll just do something to take your mind off it, distract yourself. But it's almost like we're doing a disservice to ourselves, because if it's showing up in this moment and it's what is right here for me right now to acknowledge, then it's like, I always go back to how would we, and this kind of ties back into everything we're talking about. If we have like a little child that is going through something painful, I think most of us, if we're doing this work, you're aware of a lot of things as far as like consciousness and if you're doing chakra work and things. So it would be like if we had a child who was crying and we were like, oh, sorry, I'm busy, I'll deal with you tomorrow. Like,
Right.
I can't be bothered right now by this. Whereas I don't think that would be the response for most of us, but we tend to treat ourselves this way.
Yes.
It's like such a beautiful awareness to start really being mindful about the way that we treat our own inner child, because I've learned to have a relationship with my inner child and to really like that part. It's a part of me. And that's oftentimes when a lot of these things get, the programming and all the things we're speaking of become part of like the density of the body in the early years. And if it was in the early years and it's still there, it's actually in the now. It's not in the early years. It's in the now. If everything's happening right now, it's in the now.
Right.
So we can learn how to have more of this presence and love for our inner child, and allowing that safe space, and how we would talk to our own child, or like a nephew or a niece, or just any child who's in pain and crying and sad. We would hold space in this very loving, compassionate way, most of us, I believe. But it's like we don't do the same for ourselves, or we get physically sick and we take 2 weeks off of work, but we are emotionally sad, and it's like, suck it up, buttercup, right? It's like, suck it up, like deal with it. And it just doesn't really make sense. Like I feel like a shift in that mindset's treating emotions the same as a physical sickness, because most times when you have the physical sickness, it's because we've been avoiding the other things, the emotions. So it's all
Absolutely.
tied.
Well, and I think one of the things to address what you're talking about inner child, we're talking about safety and our stability, is if you're new to this work, if you're hearing us talk about inner child, or you're talking about safety and it feels overwhelming and it feels scary, that's okay. But you're at the beginning. This is a process that takes a lifetime. It's not something that you just suddenly get because you read one book or you hear one podcast. The amount of books that I have read, and I'm still gleaming new things and experiencing new things. So it, as you said, it's in the here and now. Also know that as you're healing, each step is the here and now for you. Take it step by step. Don't feel overwhelmed. That it took me years to even be able to connect with my inner child in meditation the first time. It's only been since my grandmother got ill, and I've been on this journey for 20 years, but it wasn't the right time for me to work through my inner child because there was other stuff I was working with. And now it is time. And so, everything is brought to us in the here and now when it's time.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Everything you just said, because I've had the same experience. And I would even say, like, if it does feel scary, just even putting a hand on a heart, or just bringing awareness to your breath and just acknowledging, I feel scared right now. This feels really scary.
Mm-hmm.
Body, I feel you. Like, this feels scary, because it can feel scary, especially if this is something that's new, and maybe you were taught that it wasn't safe to feel your emotions, or it's not okay to cry, or it's not okay to acknowledge these things. And it's I have found that it will show up in perfect timing, because maybe,
Mm-hmm.
like, it did serve its purpose, and that's perfect. Like, these, when we do put these walls and use these different, like, things, it's like actually our unconscious, like, doing what it can to protect us, because maybe you were in some sort of trauma situation growing up, and it was like you were surrounded by unconscious adults, and you did what you had to do to stay safe. And when we transition and when we get older, we can actually shift that pain to wisdom. We don't have to keep recreating it. But I completely get it. It can feel very scary, and it can
Mm-hmm.
feel those things that have been suppressed. It's like when they want to come up, the body's like, well, what do you mean? Like, we've had this thing the whole time. Like, what are we going to do without this thing?
Right. That became our identity
Mm-hmm.
instead. And you said in the very beginning, and I'm going to butcher it, so I'm just going to kind of lead into it and let you recreate the wording. But when you're reading books, when you're hearing things, one of the questions to ask yourself is this mine? Or is it showing up? I forget how you said it in the very beginning of this
Yeah, there's
episode.
a couple of things. Yeah, I can point out here. Yes. So if you are, like, even noticing energies in your body, or maybe out of nowhere, you just, like, kind of feel sad, like, learning how to work with your own intuition and asking, like, is this something I created? Is this even mine? Because maybe it's the person down the
Mhm.
way and you bumped, cross paths, and, like, everything is energy. And so,
Mhm.
maybe you're picking up on their emotional stuff that they have going on. And then you can say, okay, thank you. Like, I'm just going to let go of this and choose not to connect with this anymore. And
Mhm.
so it can be so simple as that, because it's not something that you need to continue feeling. You don't have to, continue feeling
Mhm.
neighbor stuff. And so it just, even learning to work with your own intuition and to really just trust yourself and trust your body, it's a muscle, it's a process.
Mhm. Well, and all of that learning and awareness that starts in your root then leads to your sacral, where it becomes your identity and it becomes your individuality. So it's part of that journey to then move up to the next step. And as I always say, chakra work is not a one and done. Oh, I worked through my root. Now I'm up, through. You circle back. You start at the crown and you come back to the root, or you go back down through the third eye. But there is definitely that connection between the root and the crown, your safety, your awakening, your enlightenment.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be such a beautiful process when we're not trying to force it, because, like you mentioned,
Yes.
it's like, what's showing up today. And I've learned too, it's like, I hear a lot of times, and I've used this term before as well, but people are like, oh, the core wounds, and oh, I got to do the work and all these things. But it's like, well, can we just be present for what's showing up? Like, do we have to, like, try to Cause I think if we're going at it with a, I'm broken, I need to be fixed, then it's like, we're digging for stuff. And then we can fall into the trap of, oh, I got to do all this healing work, I'm broken, which is simply not true. You're not broken.
Yes.
You don't need to be fixed. It's these layers. And sometimes for me, like, I had a lot of wounding around being unworthy and abandonment, and it continued to show up in my dating relationships. And it was like another layer every time it showed up. And instead of looking at it as, oh, this darn abandonment wound, like, is here again, it's like, well, I actually have the opportunity to go deeper on what I'm ready for now. And maybe it would have been too much for my body and my system where I was at to handle. And so I love what you said about, it'll show up when it's time for, the acknowledgement, the releasing, and the letting go of the thing that you're being called and guided to let go of.
Well, and it really is that allowing the flow of energy and allowing the flow of things being presented to you, because we try to, this goes back to trying to get the work done. We try to make all these deadlines at work because that's our mindset. We've got to get this ready presentation. We've got to do this for that client. And so we take that into our own personal work of push instead of stepping sideways. And one of the things that I've started doing, because I've noticed after working with clients all day, that as soon as I turn off my computer, I'm ready to hit the couch. I want a glass of wine. I was so checked out. But I start my morning each morning, lighting a candle on my desk, smudging myself from anything that no longer serves me from the day before. But I was never calling my energy back at the end of the day so that I could be present with my family and myself. And I've started doing that. And I'm only like 10 days, and maybe 7 of those 10 days remembered to do it. But it has made such a huge difference in not pushing anymore, like getting out of that work mode so that I allow the flow of energy and presence in my house and my family. And I don't know how that has to do with root work, but it was something I felt present and needed to be said at this moment. So, calling that energy of yourself back to yourself, I think is really part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that, because I think it does speak to presence, what we've been talking about. Because if, we're having this conversation, but yet I'm like, elsewhere on my phone, it's like, I can't fully be here for what wants to come through us, because I've learned to look at it as like, it's when we're in like kind of human 3D mode, it's like the human avatar, like the mind doing the thing, the ego, the unconscious. But when we're in this place of more surrender and presence and expansion, it's like the thing that wants to like come through us, it's so different. It feels so different than when we're trying to force it. And I think that, we get into, because this kind of speaks to even like the societal conditioning and programming that's very prevalent on this planet, is like you got to be busy. If you're not doing something,
Right.
then you're not cutting it. Right. And we hear that word busy, but to me, busy, it just feels very low vibrational to me, because it's like, well, if I have a list of 10 things I need to do, and I'm like being called to actually pause and breathe, and I'm like, no, I got to do these things. Well, maybe there was something beautiful that wanted to come through for me that would have saved me the fact of maybe even having to do 5 of those things. Maybe there was like some guidance or wisdom. And if I had just taken a moment to pause and really ground into my body and bring my awareness into this moment, that I'm not in 10 other places.
Well, and I find that when I have those moments of that list, I just write it all down and then put it on my desk. And that clears my mind to see what direction I was actually thinking about it this past week. My son just got diagnosed with COVID. So he's 21. Our house is isolating, kind of keeping away from everybody, which isn't super hard right now. But looking at that of, okay, that's a pause. It's time for me to take a break and step back, because I was ready to push through all this stuff and get things done. And instead now okay, this is a void. This is a pause. This is the universe telling me, slow down. Look at what it is for you next. Don't just think you know what's next.
Yeah. I'm learning how beautiful the pauses are and how tied they are to our ability to actually receive
Yes.
and to be again grounded in this like presence like we're talking about, because I do feel like this is still applicable to the root, because when we're grounded in our body, like, and we're grounded in our breath, like it's all so tied to our ability to pause and our ability to
Mhm.
receive and our ability to listen, because that's a way that we receive. And it is less of us again in this like very cyclical like hamster wheel type energy, to where like it's like that has all been ingrained in us since birth,
Mhm.
before birth. It's been the way we've done stuff on this planet for thousands of years. And I feel that there are many of us now that are like, that doesn't really feel good like anymore. And we
Mhm.
don't really subscribe to that. I just don't. I went through that when I left law enforcement. I was in a career in law enforcement for 6 years, and I just, there was just something about it that just didn't sit with me anymore. And so when I left, it was like if I got done early for the day, I felt all this like guilt about like, but I was done with what I needed to do. And so it's just very interesting how these things like the conditioning translates into how we move about the day. But in these pauses, we can actually acknowledge these things, which takes the charge. And how, if it is like, like sucking the life out of us, it's like once it's conscious, you can't like unknow what you know.
Well, and I think one of the things that I took from what you said is, I like to call it the sacred pause or the void, because the void to me is just the darkness, it's the quiet. The sacred pause is that moment where we have reverence for the pause. Reverence is obviously my new favorite word. I don't know where I heard it, but it's been my favorite word for 2 weeks. But finding that sacred pause is available to us when we are grounded, when our root is clear, when we feel safe, because otherwise we can't take that sacred pause. We can't be comfortable in the void if we don't feel safe, because there's that whole unknown for us. And for me recently, um, my listeners all know that I've just launched this product line on Etsy, and I've spent 2 years working on it, but basically nonstop for the last 6 weeks. And I was completely comfortable with not knowing where our income was coming from, not knowing where our business was going to be, not knowing what our income was going to be. But I realized the other day, both my husband and son had plans last weekend, and I kept, well, when are you going? When are you coming back? What are you doing? And so I needed to know those definites. And because that's where I was putting my unknown and my safety, was because I was okay feeling unknown and unsafe here because I could find it somewhere else.
Yes.
So really leaning into, I spent the weekend with surrounded by crystals and doing yoga and feeling that groundingness, planted seeds for the spring garden, because being comfortable in that sacred pause and in that void and the unknown comes from that clear root.
Yeah. And I think we're coming here, like, we're seeing it in the collective stage, and then we're seeing it as like
Mhm.
on an individual level, because it's this opportunity for us to identify all the ways in which we have not been true to ourselves. Because this is what I've learned, it just always all circles back to, it's like, intuitively what's best for you, even if it feels clouded by the chatter of the mind. Like, and when we can give our power away in the most subtle of ways. But and I think there's something to be said absolutely about guidance and assistance and all these things. But I always like to like bring people back to, well, what do you think? What do you feel? What's coming up for you? Because I can say all the things all day long, but when someone is coming to that clarity and those acknowledgments on their own, it's just so powerful. And I think that it's so important for people to acknowledge any ways in which they're feeling depleted, or anything that's like a 9 out of 10 and a 6 out of 10 versus their highest a 10 out of 10 that feels expansive. Because these are all ways that are kind of can be sneaky ways that we stay stuck if we're saying yes when our yes is really a no, because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings. And it's like, well,
Mhm.
we're doing it to the detriment of ourselves. And then we're still reinforcing all these patterns and programmings of, maybe it's people pleasing, or, we just want to like don't want to fully express ourselves because we're afraid of what people would think. And again, like kind of circling back to some of the ancestral stuff, like these can be these templates that get passed down. I had a lot on my mom's side of the family, there was like a lot of poverty energy.
Mm.
Because if you think about it, like let's say you had a great grandfather, someone in your lineage that went through the Great Depression, and it
Mhm.
was so profound in their field, in their cellular memory, like these things, the way that I think of like the human being, like how programmable we are, it's also
Mhm.
like extremely powerful because we can, once we learn it, we could actually like be like, okay, I'm going to download this, I'm going to program this. But when we have like when someone has like such a profound experience to where it's almost like it's like the identity, it's like the way that they run their life, and it's around, like I'm using the poverty scarcity example, then when they have children, it's like not only is that getting passed down in the environment, but it's also encoded in the cells and in the DNA and in the
Mhm.
memory and all the physical body. And so if you're born into that, and like let's say this is just running in the background, it's like all you know, even, and you have this in like in the lineage, and it's like, because all the money stuff, that's also rooted to safety, security, because it's how we're able to purchase things and survive, so to speak, on this planet in that way. But when that gets passed down and it's running as like an energetic software program, you might be like, I don't like understand why I keep manifesting this, or why,
Mhm.
like my money goes out faster than it comes in, or I'm in a lot of debt, or whatever it might be. But there can be so many different things that are tied to it, and it can go back to the like things that were passed on in the ancestors, and then it gets reinforced by maybe spending habits in the family,
Mhm.
or, oh, sorry, we don't have the money for that. That was something I heard a lot growing up, was, oh, I don't have the money, we don't have the money. And it's like, well, if you continue to ingrain that in and anchor that in, it's like, well, yeah, that's your reality, that's the truth, that's the
Mhm.
lens you're living from. And we can change these things um, pretty easily. And it's sometimes it takes a little bit to uncover what it is. And one thing that's also important is I found that almost it's like this conscious creation piece of actually getting the body and the mind and the whole being into
Mm.
the frequency of what it is you choose to experience. And I always say this, there's something greater, like allowing the space for maybe what I don't know that I
Right.
want, because the mind and the body doesn't know the difference between what's happening in the physical reality versus when we go into this creation mode or meditation and we're feeling it. Dr. Joe Dispenza has a lot of his work is
Oh, I
around this
love him.
stuff. Yeah. So it's just it's so powerful because we have the ability to really navigate this in a way that it's like, okay, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel good. And we can acknowledge these things and choose something else. And it's learning how to work with that.
It absolutely is, and I hope that one of the things people will take away from this conversation is that it's not just a cut and dry. There's so many levels. And to use the overused onion layers of
It's
there's
so true
layers to
though.
it. I mean, I hate using that, but
Yeah.
it's so profound. Um, there's definitely all those layers, or maybe we could talk about a lotus flower because they slowly open and bloom, and there's all the layers of a flower or something. But there's layers to the work, there's layers to each chakra, there's layers to every story we're telling ourselves. There's so much to get to dig into. And the cool thing is, you don't have to dig into it all at once. You can work on your root for a little bit and then move up to your sacral, because that's the next level of individuality. And then go through and come back to root and find another layer and another level of it. And that's part of the beauty of this journey, is that we get to keep cycling through, and we have the honor of being able to do the work and to continue the work.
And what I found too, like when I have been in meditation and just in surrender and just allowing what
Mm.
God, the divine, has in store. This was, I think, a couple weeks ago. I was in like that oneness energy,
Mm.
and my crown, I could feel like this massive activation, I massive releases. Like it was like I didn't even have to do anything because I was in such a place of surrender that it was doing
Mm.
it for me. And so it's kind of a cool thing when we really begin to understand like what works for us in our own process. And, maybe you take 4 things out of this conversation that resonate and, that work for you. And I feel like that's important too, because it's using like, it's like a little piece of the puzzle, right? It's a little piece of your puzzle. And
Absolutely.
but yeah, just the illustration, it's like, sometimes it's like, yeah, we'll do the conscious work. And then sometimes just being in surrender and being willing to, allow whatever it is that life wants to show you. And that might be showing up like in your physical reality in the form of people showing up that are triggering some sort of thing in you're feeling it inside your body, and you're feeling like this, you want to react maybe, or it feels like a pattern, or very uncomfortable or emotionally charged. I've come to look at these like characters or people that show up as like it's a gift. Like I've reframed in sometimes, even though it doesn't always feel that way, I've because sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, this person like is really showing up in this way. I can't. But like when I get past like kind of the ego side of it, and I'm willing to like see, okay, what is the gift here for me? Is there a lesson? It might just be to just let it go and be neutral, but it also might be something deeper that it's reflecting to me that is maybe sometimes when we do get triggered, it's like an aspect of ourself or something that's inside of us. And it's not a judgment, but it's just, it's an opportunity to choose to see this so you can release it and not be continuing in that way anymore. Cause we're not like, we don't have to be victims, and we don't have to like have life happen to us or come at us. Like we really do have the ability to consciously manifest and create with God. And it's just it's a beautiful thing.
It really is. And I think that's one of the things you mentioned about tying back to the taking a moment and saying, is this for me? Is this showing up for me? Also, when somebody is triggering you, looking, are they showing up to teach me something, or are they showing up to reflect a characteristic of my own that I want to change? And I'll tell you what, my husband will be my mirror every time. And it's taken years for me to realize he's not actually irritating me. He's showing me something.
Yeah.
And it's normally something for myself that I would never acknowledge, but it will drive me crazy about him. And it's only been in the last few months, maybe not even a full year, that I've been able to stop getting irritated with him. And okay, what is it about me that's triggering? So that's another aspect of it, is using that mirror to see, is it a character defect of my own that I want to work on?
Yeah. And it's so much more empowering too when we look at it from this lens, because I from the beginning, when I started kind of, diving into all this stuff, I heard of the term mirror and I didn't fully understand it. But once I got like, once I understood it, it was so profound, and it cellularly hit to
Yes.
where I'm like, okay, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And it's showing up again to, give that opportunity, and for me to continue to grow and evolve and expand. It doesn't have to be something that's like coming at me or whatever is showing up. If it's eliciting some type of negative response in my body, then I have the power to choose to how I want to show up for that. I can react, or I can pause, and I can kind of like take a step back for a minute. And that's been really helpful for me, because in the past, it's like you kind of want to respond and say your piece.
Right.
But it doesn't really necessarily help the situation if both parties are showing up in their unconscious. Then it's just a battle of the egos. So what is that? It doesn't really do anything productive.
Well, and that's again, I'll keep bringing it back to root of feeling safe enough in your own self to then look at yourself and to look at the situation to know, why is it showing up for me? And that's part of the work, is getting to that place. And I don't know about you, I've been doing this work for 20 years on myself, and I'm still not there most of the time. But those times that I am there, I like want to break my arm trying to pat myself on the back, because I'm so proud that one time I got it, that one time I didn't react. I looked at it, and that tells me that all of this has been worth it, because I'm getting there.
Yeah. And I love that reminder too, because sometimes we're so hard on ourselves with this work. But
Mm-hmm.
if we take a look back, for me, it's been like 7, 8 years since I started really diving into this stuff. If we take a look back at where we were when we started our journey,
Right.
it's like, wow, like how much we've like grown and chosen to dive
Mm-hmm.
into these painful places and also like experience these expansive places. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just very special to have that, the willingness. I always say like, I'm so willing to see the truth. I choose to see the truth. And it's continued to show me things that I'm like, okay, maybe I don't want to feel that or see that, but it's like, okay, I see this is because I've chosen that and I've said it. It keeps showing up. And I just feel like this journey is just this journey back home to ourselves. It's all the ways where, we've subscribed to the things that aren't for us or not in alignment or don't feel good. And it's this coming home to
Mm-hmm.
the innate, beautiful truth and essence of who you are as a soul and what you want to experience and what you chose to experience in this lifetime. And it's not, it doesn't, I think it gets to a point where it doesn't have to be so painful. And we don't have to continue to choose to learn through all this pain and all this trauma and all these things that show up. And it continues to I do feel it continues to get easier because you are able to identify these things and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I feel this coming up, and it's conscious versus unconscious, being able to move through it in that way.
Absolutely. And it only took me 2 days of being irritated at my husband instead of the normal 7 days. So you got to give yourself every win along the way,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for being here with this conversation. I know we had the conversation about root, but there was so much more and so much added to the conversation that I really appreciate you sharing your vulnerability, sharing your thoughts, and sharing the conversation. I know my followers are going to want to find you. Where are you hanging out these days? What's the best place for people to connect with you?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I love conversations like this and I'm just so grateful. So thank you. And I do have an Instagram account. It's just my name. My website also is my name. So those are, I would say, the main places to find me as far as, yeah, if you want to kind of see where I'm at and what I'm up to and all that good stuff.
Great. Well, and we'll have the links to everything on our on our Grounding Journey podcast blog about it. So anybody who wants to go check you out can find you at groundingjourney.com. Click on the podcast. And then under that blog, we'll have links to everything for you. And we're going to have our bonus episode where we're going to talk about The Gene Keys by Richard Rudd. I have not read that, but it sounds really interesting from what you've shared with me. So I'm looking forward to the bonus episode with you.
Yeah, me too. It's been absolutely game changing. So
Good deal.
I'm
Well,
excited.
thank you again so much for being here, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for being a part of my journey. I would love to be part of yours. The podcast has inspired me to create an entire line of products available now on Etsy. I started with a chakra yoga card deck, added meditation set kits, altar kits, home blessing kits, and even a crystal chakra set. I'd love for you to check it out on my website, groundingjourney.com. There you'll find all the products and the links to purchase them